Here's the really bad news, the biggest story in the NBA. The Lakers fear they could be without LeBron James for a substantial period of time. The foot injury he suffered Sunday against the Mavericks, he was able to finish that game, but then Woj with the reports yesterday, and he joined us earlier this morning, Woj did, with the very latest on LeBron and the prognosis.
Even with a Laker team that has, according to ESPN's analytics, the easiest remaining schedule, certainly an uphill climb to get into the postseason, and uncertainty about not only when LeBron James might be able to return this season, but if he'll be able to return. I think there'll be a clear view on the extent of the injury and a potential timeline here shortly. But the fear is LeBron James will be out several weeks.
So Zach Lowe with us this morning, as is Monica. And, you and I were here together yesterday when anyone who watched the game or we did the highlight yesterday, you heard him say, I heard a pop. And so maybe the simple fact that he got up and finished the game is really the surprising part in all of this. The injury did not look good in the moment, and now this is devastating news.
I think the post-game, Greeny, you heard him talk about the urgency of that particular game, and so he does something for the short term that perhaps, and we see now, is not beneficial for the long term, but that is the predicament that this Lakers squad is in. They need everything from LeBron James to make any sort of postseason aspiration come to fruition, and unfortunately, there's only several weeks left in the season, and so this completely, in my mind, decimates what they were trying to do. I will say, silver lining, it is a big opportunity for Anthony Davis.
Tomorrow is the 1st of March, so if you sort of doing the math in your head, April 9th is the last day of the NBA regular season. So, yeah, there are only several weeks left to go. Zach, for the audience just joining us here, how do you quantify the significance of this injury?
Gigantic, enormous, devastating. Look, there's no silver lining here, and there's no complex analysis here. If LeBron James is out for most of the rest of the season, the Lakers are done. It's over. They're not going to be able to make up ground to make the playoffs. They just can't replace him, and that's not rocket science. Even if he's out for just 10 games, that's half the season. If they go 3-7 or something, their season is probably over if some of those losses are teams in front of them. And unfortunately, this is kind of baked in a little bit to the Lakers roster construction. LeBron is 37. He's second all-time in minutes. He's been hurt almost every year that he's been on the Lakers. Anthony Davis has been hurt almost every year he's been on the Lakers. This is why you can't mess around in the first half of the season with a team that doesn't make sense and can't win enough games, because there's always adversity waiting around the corner. And unfortunately, this hits at exactly the wrong time when the Lakers finally had a team that made sense.
So, Zach, I agree with you 100%. I do want to go to the silver lining point I made before you started talking, because to me, just hear me out, if you're a Laker fan and Anthony Davis can give you 20 strong games that give you a little bit of confidence in him moving forward into next season and still get you to the play-in, 6th seed is probably out of the question, but still to the play-in, I think you do take that. Not that that is something that such a storied franchise is particularly thrilled about, but I think that's the best you get down the stretch at this point.
Can AD carry them, Zach?
He can carry them somewhat, and like Monica said, 10th is not out of the question given what Utah traded at the deadline, what Portland traded at the deadline, Oklahoma City slumping, New Orleans can't win any games. 10th, 9th even is not out of the question, but it's going to be hard for them to derive offense without LeBron. AD is basically a finisher around the basket. Who's going to set him up for those plays now? It's going to be a tough uphill battle, but look, they've been a competitive, defensive-oriented team for most of the season, so they'll compete, they'll play hard. We'll just see if they can score enough.
Unfortunately, I think it's me. This happens literally as I jumped on the bandwagon. I watched them come from 27 down to beat Dallas the other day. You've seen how well they've played since they made this roster readjustment, if you will, or whatever the word that Zach used was before the trade deadline, and now it just all goes completely kaput as LeBron goes down. For those who have just joined us and have not yet heard, they may be thinking, well, maybe the Lakers can sort of hold this thing together even if they don't have LeBron. What is the message for them?
I mean, it's possible that they could still hang on to 9th or 10th. Golden State is riddled with injuries. They can't win a road game. Minnesota's been awful lately. New Orleans without Zion has been bad. Portland and Utah traded guys at the deadline. With D'Angelo Russell running point, Dennis Schroeder running point, Anthony Davis still here, it's possible they could cobble together enough, but their offense is so dependent on LeBron. They're 5-9 without him. They have no margin for error. If any of those teams, or most of them, stabilize at least a little bit, man, it is an uphill battle for the Lakers to even hang in that 9th or 10th spot. Just a devastating, devastating injury. It's going to be tough for them. It's possible given the acquisitions they've made, but it's going to be tough.
How do you see it, Monica?
I agree with Zach. I do think that the piece that I would lean on if I was a Lakers fan has been this team's ability to defend, right? If they can stick with that constitution and they can force turnovers, get out in transition, I think D'Angelo Russell is great in transition basketball. I think you've still got a bunch of shooters on the floor that will space the floor. Now, obviously, the attention that LeBron James garners doesn't have to be accounted for, but Anthony Davis is also a guy that plays big in the paint. And so, because of their defense, and again, I continue to maintain this is a huge opportunity for Anthony Davis to solidify solidify might be a strong word, but to make the case that he should have a vote of confidence from the Lakers organization as a piece that they can build around in the future. It's 20 games. Can you go back to that MVP caliber talent that we know that is in there that we don't see consistently over the course of this next run?
We'll see what we see from them out west. So you mentioned Steph Curry, one of the immortals in the Western Conference. LeBron is another. And then there's Kevin Durant, who, of course, we've not yet seen play for the Phoenix Suns. The expectation is that he will play his first game tomorrow night against Charlotte. Yesterday, here on ESPN, Charles Barkley was on First Take with Stephen A. talking about Durant's trade to Phoenix. Here's what Charles said.
He's an all-time great. But when it comes to being mentioned with some of these other guys, he's going to have to win a championship where he's the leader of the team and he's the best player. If you go back and look at LeBron, he says, I had to win a championship without Dwayne. Kobe Bryant said this too. He says, I have to win a championship without Shaq. I hold Kevin Durant to the same criteria.
Fascinating. So, Charles and KD have a little bit of a complicated a lot of people in KD have a little bit of a complicated history, just based on that and the feelings that a lot of people had about his original move to Golden State. Is that fair, Zach? Is it fair to say KD needs to lead Phoenix to a championship to validate whatever it is that we think needs to be validated?
KD doesn't really need anything. Kevin Durant is Kevin Durant. Just imagine, let's reverse history and say, instead of signing with the Warriors, and I think we can all agree that borderline ruined the league for a few years. You just knew who the overall juggernaut favorite was every season. The deck was stacked. Let's say he signs with the Wizards or the Celtics and he doesn't win a title, but he plays amazingly. Maybe he gets to the finals one year and they almost win and he carries that team to within a couple of games of the title and then they lose in the conference finals another year or something. Are we thinking anything less of Kevin Durant today than we do now? I mean, I know those Warriors championships, people endlessly want to debate them and should he have stayed in Oklahoma City or whatever, but this is a 7-foot all-time great jump shooter who is elite at literally everything there is in basketball. He doesn't need people like me who can't dunk, who can't do anything to say he needs this or that to validate his career. He's going to finish as one of the top 12 players, top 15 at very, very worst, regardless. He's Kevin Durant. This idea that he needs something to me is not fair.
It's interesting. His legacy is complicated and maybe somewhat unto itself based on that. Maybe looking at him, trying to judge him in exactly the same way we judge the careers of those who came before him is complicated to do. How do you see what Charles said?
But to your point, Greeny, that's our problem, not his. And so when I listen to that quote from Charles, yes, he has a wealth of wisdom, respected Hall of Famer, the whole bit. But the immediate thought that came to my mind is something that my mom used to say, I ain't got to do nothing but stay black and die. Like, the idea that KD needs to be given our blessing, it just doesn't exist. And if you go back to something he said, I believe in his Letterman interview, he talked about, for him, joy, and he may have mentioned peace, but I know for certain he mentioned joy. If he's good with his moves, then so be it. I think we're past the era of punishing guys for teaming up to be successful. That's where we are in the NBA. However, I will say this. If Dame manages to get it done without ever teaming up, that will be an accomplishment, and that will be asterisk next to that because he didn't do it. But in terms of the team-up thing, we're past that.
Look, I agree with what you're saying, but the only thing I will say is that Durant himself seems to be very conscious of what people are saying. He was responding on Instagram to these things from Charles yesterday. So to say that it doesn't make any difference what anyone else thinks, it does seem to make a difference to him.
Even that, Greeny, is through our lens. If he got Twitter fingers and he's good chirping, but he's peaceful and he's fine, like, you know what I mean? Like, we keep trying to put this, you need to be a leader, you can't respond on Twitter, on KD. That is personally what I subscribe to, but I'm not that man. And so I think we need to allow him to just play basketball because that's all he wants to do and admire that.